Tonight I will be telling 7 stories. Deepwood stories and psychological horror will be of main topics this time around. A huge thank you to the writers who allowed me to share their stories. They're the ones that make these videos possible, and there are links to where you can find more of their work in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, likes and comments are always appreciated. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I was born and raised in a very small town of perhaps 500 people. When surrounded by the near endless forest, it can feel as though you are isolated from the rest of the outside world. There are many old sayings in my hometown, bits of advice passed down through the generations, to act as cautionary tales against dangers both real and imagined. One warning in particular affected me deeply when I was a child. My grandmother would often say, "If you are standing in the shade of an old tree, don't look up. A stranger's face may look back down at you. The stranger may be an angel, or it may be a devil. Don't look up. Just say a prayer so that the devil keeps away, and the angels watch over you." Well, this seemed like just another one of the countless tales told to just make the kids say their prayers. This story planted within me a deep subconscious aversion to looking up while under trees. I'm not sure that I would have been able to look up well beneath a great old pine tree, no matter how hard I tried. It's strange how impressionable the mind of a young child can be. There were more than a few tales that left that sort of impression on me. To be honest, the majority of these cautionary tales seem to skirt the border between creative and terrifying a little too closely. As I became older, however, I forgot the specifics of most of these, and these subconscious fears gradually faded away. Despite this, I never did look up while under a large tree, until about a year ago. I had a close friend in that small town. His name was Lewis. I use past tense here because he passed away just over a year ago. I'm not sure that I would go so far as to say that he was my best friend, but in a town that small, everyone you spend time with leaves a strong impression. While we certainly spent more time together as children, we had stayed in touch and still hung out from time to time right up until the end. I hadn't realized just how much of a role he had played in my life until he was gone. He washed ashore in a local creek approximately 1 week after he was reported missing. There was no evidence of foul play, and nobody knows why he went missing, or how he ended up in a creek to begin with. It was a hot, sunny day on the afternoon of Lewis's funeral. The entire summer had been a sort of cloudless fever dream, with sun so bright that you could hardly keep your eyes open, and cicadas buzzing so loudly that you couldn't hear your own thoughts. That afternoon was no different, and our only respite from the beating sun was the shade cast by the old oak tree in the cemetery. As the pastor fought against the screaming cicadas for our strained attention, his words seemed to fuse together with the relentless buzzing. It was as my focus drifted away from his speech that I forgot about the fear which had always kept my eyes pointed firmly downwards. As my head rolled back, my gaze was met with another. There were a pair of eyes staring intensely down at me from among the dark, tangled branches. I froze in disbelief as the shadowed face with piercing, human eyes stared down at me. As I stared back at the face in the branches, I realized the old story had been wrong. This was not a face of a stranger, but undeniably, it was the face of my former friend Lewis. It was as the mouth began to gape slowly open, and the first crack of sound came out that my vision faded completely. Heat stroke. When I came to in the hospital, no one seemed surprised by my recollection of the events leading up to the stroke. After all, hallucination is par for the course when passing out from heat exhaustion. My assertion that it was Lewis's face specifically, that I had seen at none other than Lewis's own funeral, simply painted a picture of grief and mourning, and elicited the sort of concern that caused me to stop talking about it altogether. That's not to say that I was completely unfazed by his passing, but I was certainly not affected to the extent of delusion. Subconscious fear is a fascinating thing. When the warning was nothing more than a story, the fear was paralyzing, and to look up well beneath a tree seemed impossible to me. However, now that I felt I had truly seen something, this deep fear caused in me an opposite effect. While I was terrified still, I had an inching compulsion to look beneath the branches now. Before, the only risk was that my fears would be confirmed, but now that I had possibly seen what I feared, I had a craving to disprove it by doing what I knew I shouldn't. It hadn't seemed possible, But the summer that year had grown hotter, and the cicadas louder. It was hard to find the motivation to go outside in those conditions. Yet my summer job as an assistant park ranger had me out in the blinding sun on a near daily basis. Mostly just doing the rounds. Given the unbearable climate, the shade of the trees in the park was the only barrier between myself and another embarrassing medical incident. I had no real training in any relevant field, and no aspiration to become a park ranger or similar, but the idea of spending the summer between college semesters outdoors seemed like a good idea to me. In hindsight, this was not the correct decision. It was on one particularly bright Wednesday afternoon that the victor of my aforementioned internal struggle was decided. A moment came where the already burning sunlight seemed to intensely farther, as if non-existent clouds had parted and allowed a previously inconceivable amount of sunlight through. Seeking shelter from the pounding heat, I ducked beneath a large spruce tree, which stood largely alone in an open, well-kept field. The relief of the shade was short-lived, as my new proximity to the source of the screaming cicadas quickly became apparent. As I stared out into the now pitch-white, fluttering landscape surrounding me, I could only focus more intensely on the sound of the cicadas, seemingly growing louder as I involuntarily listened more closely. Now lost in the bitter hum of the hidden insects, I began to hear what seemed to be words forming from the steady screeching. The more I listened, the more familiar the voice and the buzzing became, and it was then that my gaze was drawn upward once more, towards the dark tangled branches. Lewis looked back down at me again, but it was not the Lewis now that I had seen before. This Lewis was a pale gray, and his features were swollen. His face seemed to be incorporated into the branches to some degree, and his features puffed out unnaturally. His mouth opened as it had before. Only now it was evident that the sound which came out was formed by the distorted cacophony of the tree-dwelling insects. "Who are you? Let go of me." The next memory I have after hearing those words is that of waking up beneath the old spruce tree. As if from a casual summer nap, there were only gnarled branches facing down at me when my eyes opened, without any sign of Lewis in that dark, tangled mess. The sun had returned to its usual intensity, and the cicadas buzzed at their usual volume. I'm not quite sure what those words had meant exactly, but given the mysterious circumstances surrounding Lewis's final days, I can't help but feel as though the face in the trees might yet have a disturbing story to tell. I dread to imagine what the face of my late friend will look like the next time it presents itself. What the actual hell? Okay, I don't really know how to start this. I don't know how to explain where I came from or how I got here. I just know that things are different here. Not completely different. Almost imperceptible, really. But I know that this plane of existence, or whatever, it's not my home. Those aren't my parents. Those aren't my friends. And before you go asking stupid questions, no. I didn't piss off a witch, or a demon, or a malevolent god. I didn't piss anyone off. I know that for a fact, because I never leave my house. Some might call me a hermit. Assholes, that is. What it really is agoraphobia. But I don't have to explain myself to you. The point is, I don't interact with anyone besides the people that come into my home. And I certainly haven't let any strangers in. Do I look like an idiot to you? Let me start at what is the best of my knowledge of the beginning. After all, surely this began before I can recall. I woke up a few mornings ago and got up to make myself coffee. I have a Keurig, and as I groggily placed the pod filled with beautiful coffee grounds into the slot, something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention. The wallpaper. It's different. Like I said, it's not completely obvious that it's different. It's like a trained eye, or, you know, the eyes of someone who is very familiar with their surroundings. In the kitchen I have some ugly floral wallpaper. It used to be covered in roses, and poppies, and dahlias. Very red, but the poppies aren't there anymore. They've been replaced by rose mallows. The flowers themselves look similar, but unmistakably different. So I thought to myself, odd. Was it rose mallows all along? Maybe I've just been misidentifying the kind of flowers that make up my horrendously hideous wallpaper. But that's not the only thing. My mother came to visit around midday. Big sunglasses perched atop her blonde head, with groceries in tow. She regularly brings me the supplies I need to survive. We used to fight about it a lot. About how I just need to pull myself up out of my bootstraps and leave the house. But she gave up a while ago. Of course, there was a slight problem. My mother isn't blonde. "Oh, you've gone blonde," I said, excitement in my voice. It looks good on her, I'll admit. She gave me a strange look and set down the armful of groceries that she'd brought inside. "Gone?" she repeated, a little dubious. Yeah," I replied easily, now looking deeply into her reaction, figuring she was just judging me for my phrasing. "Your hair?" At that, her eyes narrowed. "I've always been blonde." "Then, you're doing it again." I blinked. "Doing what again?" She sighed and shook her head. "I just came over to bring you some groceries, hon. I can't get into this with you again." "Again?" I repeated, suddenly worried for my mother's health. "Mom, are you okay? You're not making any sense. And you were a brunette last time I saw you." My mother sent me a glare. The only other times I've seen her glare at me like that are when I used to act up in public and embarrass her. That's clearly not a problem anymore, seeing as I'm never in public to act up. "Don't turn this on me," she hissed, and then turned and left, slamming the door behind her. Weird, right? No, it's more than weird. It's concerning. So I called my dad. Told him Mom's acting weird, and then he got shitty with me too. "I can't believe you're doing this to your mother again, after everything that she does for you, and you won't even make an effort to leave that rotting house and get a job. Contribute to society. Honestly, I don't know why you're like this. We didn't raise you to..." I realized we weren't making any headway to getting to the bottom of whatever was wrong with my mom, so I went ahead and hung up. Next, I went to my friends to complain. Online friends, mostly. But also some people I knew in high school that still talked to me through Facebook Messenger. They all responded in kind of the same way. This again? Like I'd inconvenienced them with this kind of nonsense before, and they were getting sick and tired of it. At first, this place felt reminiscent of that familiar feeling of, everything is the same, except it's been moved 2 inches to the left. But the longer I'm here, the more off everything seems. My fridge is full of leftovers that I never cooked. There are DVDs in my collection that I've never heard of, and even more that are missing. Reddit's layout is completely different. The air is heavier, and my mother is a blonde. I have freckles that I never noticed before. My hair is still a mossy brown color, but it seems like it's 2 shades darker than it's ever been. And everyone that I talk to about this responds with exasperation, as though they've heard the story a million times, and they're fed up with it. This isn't my home. This isn't my life. I'm trapped inside a house that no longer feels like my own. I'm more terrified than ever to venture outside, to see what else is different. Part of me feels like I'm going insane, but I can't accept that. I know I don't belong here. I need to go back, but I can't even leave my front step. And I'm starting to suspect that my destination is universes away, dimensions away. How is an agoraphobe supposed to make a trek like that? I'm just as unsure about how to end this as I was beginning it. All I know is that this is real, and I need to get out. And if there are any interdimensional travelers out there, I'd really appreciate some advice. Hopefully a way to get back without actually leaving my house. I know that's a tricky one. Each day I'm stuck here, the air gets heavier. I'm afraid one day it's going to crush me. The trees rustled as the wind blew through the thick canopy above me. I could feel a cool breeze coming in through the vent holes of my helmet. I was out of breath, but I wasn't done yet. I shifted into a higher gear and pushed down on the right pedal hard, then the left, over and over again, until I was moving so quickly through the narrow wooded trail that I couldn't focus my eyes. I moved my fingers up to the brake lever and pulled back, coming to a screeching halt. I paused to catch my breath when I heard something coming from behind me, closing in quick. Turning my head, and I noticed a small man barreling through the trail at about twice the speed I was going. I tried to move out of his way, but he was coming in too fast. Suddenly, my bike shot out from under me, and we both tumbled to the ground. I looked over, somewhat dazed, and noticed a tall, muscular man on the ground next to me. He jumped back to his feet quickly and pulled his bike up off the ground. "Geez, man," he started with a chuckle. "You gotta warn a brother if you're just gonna stop short in the middle of the trail." He helped me up off the ground before dusting the leaves and dirt from his shirt. "I'm sorry, man," I said apologetically. "I didn't realize you were so close behind me." I reached down and began lifting my bright yellow mountain bike out of the dirt. After a thorough examination, I came to the conclusion that the damage was superficial, nothing major. "You didn't get hurt, did ya?" he asked, looking me up and down. I quickly examined my body and, aside from a small scrape on my elbow, everything seemed fine. "Nah, I'm alright," I replied as I mounted the bike to begin riding again. "Good. I'd hate myself if you got hurt. I'm Thomas, but people usually just call me T." He extended his gloved hand out for a handshake. "I'm Jake," I said, returning the gesture and gripping his hand. He gave a firm, steady shake. It was no surprise considering he was built like a brick house. I noticed a small tattoo on his forearm. It looked to be a triangle, and inside was a cannon, bisected by a lightning bolt. Atop of that was a number 1, and below were the words, "Old Ironsides." "First armored?" I asked. He looked surprised. I suppose I didn't quite fit the typical former military stereotype, but lo and behold, here I was. "Yeah," I could hear the pride in his response. "Did you serve?" "Sure did. 2nd Infantry," I replied, matching his proud tone. It wasn't every day you meet a fellow veteran in the middle of a secluded, wooded trail. We decided to stick together and ride it out for the remainder of the day. I let him lead the ride, which, in hindsight, was probably a mistake considering he was so much faster than me. As I pedaled, I struggled to keep up. He continued, seemingly going faster and faster as he rode. He made it look effortless. After about 3 miles, I tried to call up to him that I needed to stop. I needed to take a break to catch my breath. "Hey, I struggled to get the words out as I gasped for air. Before I knew it, he was gone. I sat and caught my breath for a few seconds before continuing up the trail, following in his path. As I continued moving forward, I noticed the trail fork. To the right was a black trail, and to the left was a blue. Similar to ski slopes, mountain bike trails use colors to guide the difficulty of the trail that lie ahead. I knew my skill set, and I knew that black was out of the question. I moved through the trail to the left, continuing past thickets of pine and oak trees. I followed the trail for miles, but never seemed to catch up to T. I rounded a corner, moving past the final trailhead marker and into the parking lot. There was no sign of T here either. I rode up next to a picnic table, hopped off my bike and sat. I figured he must have went through the black trail, which may have been longer than the blue one that I was on. I thought if I waited a few minutes he'd come blowing out of the trail and start giving me crap for not keeping up. To my disappointment, he did not. I waited for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20, 45, and I couldn't wait any longer. Did he ditch me? I thought. I jumped on my bike and pedaled through the parking lot. As I pulled up to my pickup truck, I noticed a few spaces away there was a small SUV with an Old Ironside sticker on it. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a small business card. I turned it over and wrote up a quick note. "Hey T, sorry I couldn't keep up. I need to get home. Hit me up next time if you go out. Jake." And then I left my phone number. I placed it under the windshield wiper on the driver's side. I figured this would be an obvious spot and he'd see it before he pulled out of the parking lot. 4 days went by and there was no word from T. Maybe he didn't actually want a riding buddy. Or maybe he saw the note and laughed at the thought of going back out with me, since I couldn't keep up the first time. A couple days after that, I got a call. "Hello?" I said as I picked up the phone. I expected it to be T saying he was going out riding the next day and wanted to meet up. Hell, I even expected it to be a scammer or a robocall. I expected anything before I expected what came next. "Hello, this is Officer Powell with the police department," the man said on the other line. "We found a note on an abandoned vehicle here at the Santos trailhead, with your phone number on it. We were wondering if you know the whereabouts of, He paused for a moment. "Thomas Redfield?" I sat in shock. T never made it back to his car. "No," I stuttered into the phone. "I had just met Thomas. Out there on Sunday while I was riding. Did something happen to him?" Scenarios started running through my mind. I began thinking of all the possible reasons T never made it back to his car. Did he fall and break something? Did he get mauled by a bear? Kidnapped? "We're not sure. His car has been here in the parking lot for at least 5 days. We've had officers searching the woods nearby, but they haven't found anything." My heart stopped for a second. "Can you come down to the station so we can ask you some questions?" "Yeah, I'm on my way now." I said as I made my way out the door. After a few hours of the standard questions, I was let go. The police told me they had no leads, and there was no one that the family could think of who might have a motive against T. He simply vanished without a trace. Another 2 weeks went by before I decided to break the bike out again. That whole situation left me feeling uneasy out there in the woods. But I had an itch I needed to scratch. Mountain biking was an addiction of mine, after all. I made my way to the trailhead and unloaded my bike from the bed of my truck. I took a couple practice rounds on the pump track, a small circuit of rollers and berms near the entrance, before making my way onto the main trail. As I passed by the information board, I noticed a piece of laminated paper with a familiar face on it. Someone, likely the police, had taped up a missing persons poster. T could be seen in the black and white photo wearing his dress blue uniform, smiling brightly. As I examined the photo, I felt a strong sense of dread creep over my whole body. Goosebumps rose in my arms and the nape of my neck, and I shuddered. I quickly shrugged it off and began my ride. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling though. Knowing someone had gone missing in these woods not 3 weeks before really gave me the creeps. On top of that, I had literally just met him. He was a nice guy. I continued through the trail, pedaling harder and harder, moving faster and faster. When I came upon a familiar area, I pulled my brakes and skidded to a halt. This was a familiar fork where the trail split 2 ways. I decided to try my luck with the black trail this time. I figured if it got too sketchy, I'd just hop off and walk my bike through to the other side. It started off pretty standard. There was a steep drop right at the beginning, which looked more intimidating than it actually was. Then it continued steadily uphill. As I gained elevation, I began to feel like I was being watched. I darted my eyes back and forth across the trail, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Once I reached the top of the climb, I decided to stop and take a drink of water. I heard leaves crackle around me, and for a second at least, I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I averted my eyes left, but there was nothing. An eerie silence fell over the woods. After a minute or so, I caught my breath and began moving farther down the trail. The dreadful feeling of being watched persisted, causing me to increase my speed. I was on a downhill slope, pedaling as hard as I could. I was trying to scan the trail in front of me to avoid any roots or loose rocks that lay in the way when, suddenly, I found myself flying over the front end of my bike. I hit the hard-packed dirt with a tremendous force, knocking the wind from my lungs. I struggled to catch my breath for a second when I noticed it. The thing that had been watching me. It crawled off the trunk of an old oak tree that had to be 4 feet in diameter. It was about 10 feet off the trail. It moved with sharp, jagged motions using only its front 2 arms. The back legs appeared smaller and remained limp. The front half of its body was huge with broad shoulders and a hairless, eyeless head that contained only a mouth and 2 slits for nostrils. It moved unnaturally, first swinging its massive arms back, then rotating them up over its shoulders and bringing them back down in front, to the ground. Its long, razor-sharp claws dug into the dirt, as if it propelled itself forward towards me. I staggered to my feet as the terrifying creature moved closer. I turned and scanned my surroundings, trying to find my bike, but somehow it had been thrown 25 feet off the trail into the brush. I began running back up the hill, the way I came. Each step I took, the creature continued closing the distance. It was fast and moved through the trees and shrubs with ease. As I attempted to make the climb up the steep hill I had just came down, I felt my foot slip out from underneath me. Loose dirt and pebbles shifted, and I fell face first into the ground. I caught myself with my arms and attempted to pick myself up to no avail. I continued sliding down the hill, straight towards the monster. It continued moving closer and closer to me. I could hear it making some sort of noise, something like a cross between a toad croaking and a dog growling. I screamed, louder than I've ever screamed in my life. The monster continued, not even flinching at the audible screech escaping my throat. I rolled onto my back, trying to push my way back up the hill with my feet, but it was no use. It was too close for me to escape now. The monster had closed the distance, and was now right on top of me. It snarled, exposing jagged, wood-like teeth, and I could smell a distinct smell of rotting, dead flesh on its breath. Its skin was deep and rigid. Appearing like tree bark, it screeched in my face, and I heard something whip around to the side. Then, everything went black. I woke to an intense pain in my abdomen and my lower thigh. I was being carried through the woods, far from any sign of the trail. The creature had me in its mouth, teeth penetrated my skin and my stomach and legs. I knew this was the end, and I would soon be ripped from limb to limb. I lost consciousness once again. When I awoke this time, I was on the ground. The seething pain in my stomach and leg continued, but the creature was nowhere to be seen. I pulled myself up to a sitting position and looked around. This appeared to be some sort of nest. Upon farther examination, I noticed what looked like bone fragments scattered throughout the area where I laid. I looked to my left, searching for a way out, but only saw dense brush and trees. I looked right and noticed a familiar face. "T," I shouted. He didn't move. I began scurrying over to him, fighting the intense pain I felt with each movement. As I got closer, I saw something that sent chills down my spine. T had been torn, clean in half. His upper body remained untouched, but the entirety of his lower body was no longer present. I expected to see blood pouring from the wound, but there was nothing. "Oh my God," I said, choking back vomit and tears. T must have been that way since the day he went missing. The blood around his waist had coagulated and turned a dark brown. Entrails spilled out onto the ground with flies swarming around. I heard a familiar croak and oriented my gaze towards the noise. Suddenly, out of the tree came 3 creatures, similar to the one I'd encountered before. They moved jaggedly, reaching their arms behind their back and swinging them up, over their heads before bringing them down and digging sharp claws into the ground. They were much smaller than the first beast, but moved just as fast, if not quicker. I jumped to my feet and began limping away, as quickly as possible. They continued after me. I searched the ground for anything I could use as a weapon, and came across a large tree limb. I reached down and picked it up, continuing to move with the 3 babies hot on my trail. They were closing the gap. I brought the stick to the ready, holding it like a baseball bat, and turned around as the creatures approached. They were getting closer, moving faster and snarling, exposing blood-soaked fangs in their mouths. I swung the stick around quickly, striking one of the creatures and sending it flying through the woods. The other 2 stopped and looked at each other quizzically before letting out a blood-curdling scream. I could hear something in the distance now, a faint thud falling rhythmically. They called for their mother, and she was coming. I took off in a mad dash, unsure of which way I needed to go. I moved through the forest, hearing the screech of the babies and the deep croak of the mother as she continued toward me. Thud, thud, thud. The steps continued, getting louder as they moved closer. I began searching for anything I might be able to hide in, when I noticed a small pond covered by a layer of bright green slime. Against my better judgment, I went in. I tried to be as quiet as possible, knowing the creatures could hear my movements, as I lowered myself into the cesspool of murky swamp water. Once I was about waist deep in the disgusting water, I took a deep breath and lowered my head under. I could still hear the faint thud of the creature as it walked through the forest. I heard its footsteps slow as it got closer. It had lost me. All I needed to do was hold my breath and wait for it to retreat, and then I could run to safety. This proved harder than I anticipated, considering the creature spent what felt like hours, searching the nearby area for me. I struggled to keep my breath held with my head under the cool water. I could hear the footsteps begin to retreat, but it still wasn't safe. I needed to wait until the audible footsteps faded away before I could come back up. Finally, there was silence. I pushed through the thick layer of slimy moss that coated the top of the water and began panting. I had no time to wait and catch my breath though. I took off running, as fast as my legs could take me, fighting the pain with each step I took. I was constantly checking behind me as I fought my way through the thick brush. Knowing the creature could easily catch me only made the adrenaline pump through my body quicker and sent me into a sort of overdrive. The pain was no longer in my legs, and I was moving without regard for anything. I plowed through thorn bushes, ignoring any resulting injuries, and just kept moving. My only goal at this point was survival. I heard the familiar croak in the distance, followed by the familiar thud of the creature's giant footsteps falling on the ground. Then, as if by divine intervention, or magic, I came across a familiar area. I saw a narrow dirt trail in front of me with a deep skid mark. This was the spot where T and I first met. The quickest way out would be to go to the opposite direction of the trail. This would take me back to the trailhead where I could get to my car and drive to safety. I ran, feeling the ground vibrate as the creature grew closer and closer. I heard the croak growing louder and louder, piercing through the dense woods as the creature continued moving toward me. Then I saw it. Freedom. The familiar archway that marked the beginning of the trail was in front of me. I was home free. I continued running, making my way towards the archway when I noticed movement out of my peripherals. I turned my gaze to the creature moving through the woods next to me. It began closing the gap between us and lunged for me. Narrowly avoiding the claws that reached for me, I pushed my legs to move faster. I made it through the archway into the parking lot. I heard the creature's footsteps stop, and it gave a piercing screech. I looked back to see it standing just behind the archway, as if being held back by some invisible force. I continued running toward my car. I jumped in and started the engine before pulling out as the tires spun on the concrete. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. To this day, I still have no clue what that thing was. I have no plans to find out either. Needless to say, I haven't been back on my bike since. Did you know that the idea of snowmen goes back to medieval times? The first documented snowman was in the Book of Hours from 1380. People used to make snowmen for different reasons. Some would make them as a distraction from the bleak winter, and others would make them to ward off evil spirits. My experiences with snowmen, however, have been a lot darker, and even after 10 years. Whenever I see the snow start to fall, my mind flashes back to when I was a kid. Scott, wake up, it's snowing outside. As soon as I heard my father shouting up at me that the snow was falling, I bolted out of my bed and flew down the stairs. Shoes. Dad, where are my shoes? I shouted while maniacally running through the house, grabbing the first coat I could find. I was about to open the front door when my mom called from upstairs. Your shoes are in the kitchen. Make sure you put them on before going outside. Within seconds, I had run to the other side of the house, got my shoes, and ran back to the front door. As I pulled open the door, my body shivered as the frigid air hit my exposed skin. The driveway was covered in a thick sheet of snow. There were patches of exposed grass sticking out of the driveway, like islands in a vast white ocean. I jumped into the snow, and to my surprise, it was a lot deeper than it first appeared. It almost cut me off at the waist. I had to swim to get to the recently cleared road. I could hear the kids from up the street beginning to exit their houses. You could almost taste the excitement in the air. A shiver ran through me again, but I didn't care. I loved the snow. It was like a completely different world when the snow fell. It covered everything in its sight, but by the end of the day, the street would look different. There would be leftover forts from the massive snowball fights we would all have. And my personal favorite, there would be a snowman on every driveway. Hey Scott, I knew you'd be the first one outside. I turned around, trying hard not to slip on the sections of ice that was hidden by the snow. Standing in front of me, covered head to toe with 2 scarves and a jacket that was far too big for him, was Michael, but everyone called him Mike. Hey Mike, I see your mom wouldn't let you out of the house until you were wrapped up tighter than my dad's hand around his wallet. For those who don't know, my dad, when it came to money, he got a little obsessive. Mike gave me a chuckle as he took one of his scarves off and shoved it into his pocket. So, have you seen the twins yet? He was referring to Jack and Lucy, but for obvious reasons, we called her Jill, even though she hated it. Not yet. You know what Jack is like. He prefers staying indoors. The only reason he comes out is that his mom makes him keep an eye on Lucy. Mike laughed and fell backwards into the snow, pushing a milky white cloud into all directions as his body disappeared into it. You still alive down there, Mike? I said as I walked over to the section of the driveway he disappeared into. I could hear giggling as I got closer to him. He looked ridiculous as the only part of him that was sticking out of the snow was a very red nose. He bolted upright, causing me to jump back before my foot hit a section of ice, and I too fell into the snow. We both laid there for a second before we burst out with laughter and started pushing the snow with our arms and legs, making snow angels. As we stood up to admire our handwork, we started laughing again. We made the worst snow angels ever. Hey, what on earth are you two doing? I looked up and Jack and Lucy were walking across the road towards me. Lucy had a giant smile on her face, and Jack had the same miserable look on his. He had pulled his bright red scarf up, so it covered most of his face. Before I could respond, Mike started singing. Jack and Jill came up the hill to fetch a... Before he could finish, Lucy punched him square in the arm. Ouch. You know how girls aren't meant to go around punching people? But you are so easy to beat up. Lucy smiled and gave him a wink. Mike started walking around the twins, saying how sorry he was. But I knew what he was planning. I could see him kicking the snow into a pile as he walked. He gave me a sly smile before he gathered up the mound of snow in his arms and dumped it over the head of Lucy. Lucy let out a high-pitched squeal before turning to Mike and pushing him into the snow. Okay, I give up. You win, Jill. She scowled at him. Sorry, I meant to say you win, Lucy. She reached out her hand and helped Mike up. Believe it or not, this is how things usually started whenever we hung out. So Jack, are you going to join in with us today? I knew the answer. Jack hardly said anything. He just stuck next to his sister and went where she went. I don't think I've ever seen him make a single snowball in all the time I've known him. He didn't say anything. He just stared off into the distance. So, who wants to have a little competition? I said as I stood there waiting for Mike to jump at the opportunity to get one over on Lucy. I'm game, Mike said, spinning on his heels to face Lucy. Whatever it is, I doubt Mike will be able to beat me, Lucy said as she too spun on her heels to face Mike. It's the first snow day, and most of the street has been left untouched, so each of us will go to our respective houses and make the best snowman we can. We will go around and decide who made the best one, and that person gets to decide what we do tomorrow. I could see the evil glimmer in Mike and Lucy's eyes as cogs started turning in their heads, each of them thinking of a way to embarrass the other. Okay, so the rules are as follows. We can only use the snow that's on our driveway and in our garden, and no sabotaging. I gave Lucy the best evil look I could muster. I knew if anyone was going to try to play anything dirty, it would be her. Within seconds, Mike and Lucy sprinted back to their houses with Jack following behind Lucy, trying not to be left behind. Alright, time to go to work. I slapped my cheeks and began shoving snow into a big pile in the center of the driveway. With every handful of snow, I could feel the heat being stolen from my hands. After an hour of piling up snow, I could finally get to work on my snowman. I started packing as much of the snow as I could into a giant ball. At this point, I could no longer feel my hands, but I didn't care. I was going to win the competition. Hours went by, and finally, I took a step back to admire my work. I had made a snowman that was almost twice my height. I had used 2 branches from the tree in my garden for the arms. I borrowed my dad's baseball cap and sunglasses for the head. As I stood there staring at my masterpiece, I couldn't help but feel it was missing something. Then I had a light bulb moment. What's better than a snowman? A creepy snowman. I ran back inside my house and started searching for our Halloween decorations. I eventually found a box hidden under a bunch of coats in the cupboard. As I started pulling out fake spiders and witch masks at the bottom of the box, I found what I needed. A pair of yellow and bloodshot eyeballs that I had made from clay. It took me 2 days to make and paint the eyes when my mom saw them and freaked out because she thought they were real. It was a great Halloween. I ran back outside and behind the sunglasses, I stuck the eyes I made. As I took a couple of steps backwards to admire my work, even I was creeped out. Between the snowman and the eyes, it honestly looked like its gaze followed me as I moved. I decided to put the sunglasses back on. That way I could scare Mike, Lucy, and Jack when they came over, but mostly so the eyes would stop watching me. Scott, come over and see my snowman. Jack and Jill are over here already. I heard Mike shout from across the road. I ran over trying to avoid the ice and could see Mike rubbing his arm. He looked like he was in pain. I didn't need to ask what happened as I assumed Lucy had hit him. Mike was standing in front of a large blanket that gave the slight outline of a person. It was the same size as Mike, and once he saw me, his smile almost went from ear to ear. With one quick pull of the blanket, Mike revealed his masterpiece. Unfortunately, the strength that he put behind removing the blanket caused the snowman's head to come crashing to the floor. Lucy let out a loud laugh, as you could see tears beginning to fill Mike's eyes. He quickly rubbed them away. Dang it, I spent all day on that, Mike said as he punched the remaining parts of his snowman. It's meant to be snowing again tonight, so you can give it another go tomorrow, I said while trying not to laugh. Even if his snowman would have survived, it never would have beat mine. Lucy said as she started skipping towards our house with Jack following behind. Come on, Mike, you never know. Lucy's might have already fallen over by now, I said as I started walking towards Lucy's house. I doubt I'm that lucky. Mike replied as he reluctantly followed me. Lucy's snowman was definitely unique. As Mike and I walked over to her house, you could see what looked like someone sat in her garden. Instead of the normal 3 balls that made up a snowman, she had opted for a more comical version of a snowman. She had borrowed her grandmother's wheelchair, and on top of the wheelchair, She had piled on a large amount of snow. She had used a wig for the hair, and what looked like her grandmother's glasses and clothes, to make it look more realistic. Jill, I hate to say it, but this is one realistic looking snowman. Mike said while looking at the floor, and kicking the loose patches of snow. You could see Lucy's smug smile beginning to envelop her face. You could tell that out of us three, she wanted to at least beat Mike. So, Scott, what do you think? Lucy said while turning to face me. Well, Lucy, it's definitely interesting, and weirdly realistic, but unfortunately, I don't think it'll beat mine. She scowled at me. Well, let's go see your so-called amazing snowman then. I smiled and started walking back towards my creepy snowman, with them following up the rear. We got to the edge of my driveway and I froze. I know it was cold, but the shiver that ran through me, as my eyes first laid on what used to be my snowman, haunts me to this day. The snowman was no longer twice my height, and it wasn't made out of the 3 giant snowballs I had spent all those hours gathering. Standing in front of me was a child made out of snow. He was a little smaller than me, but the facial features that were carved out of the snow were almost a picture-perfect version of Jack. The snowboy even had his bright red scarf wrapped around his slender, snow-made neck. His eyes were closed, but I guess whoever had made this had covered up the Halloween eyes that I stuck in his head with snow, but I couldn't work out why. Whoever made this snowboy had wanted to creep us out, so why take away the one creepy element of my snowman? Scott, I give up. You win. This is the greatest and creepiest snowman I have ever seen, Lucy said, while taking a couple of steps towards the snowman. Scott, you have to teach me how to make snowmen as realistic as yours. Mike said as he placed his hand on my shoulder. I just stood there. Who could have made this snowman? I was only away from it for 10, maybe 15 minutes. Wait, you guys, where's Jack? Looking around, he was nowhere to be seen. Maybe he snuck away. Made the snowman and then went to get out of the cold. Do you think he went home? Mike and Lucy just shrugged. They were entranced by the snowboy. I heard my front door open, as my dad stuck his head out of the doorway. Alright, Mike, Lucy, it's time for you two to head home. Scott, dinner's ready. Coming, Dad, I shouted back as I got to the front door. I looked back to find Mike and Lucy still staring intensely at the snowboy. As we sat down for dinner, my dad congratulated me on the snowman that I had made. He even said that at first, he thought it was just Jack covered in snow. What worried me though was what my dad said next. You have to tell me how you made the eyes so realistic. Dad, what are you talking about? The eyes were covered in snow. I turned to look out the window. The snowman was still standing there in our driveway. Dad, do you see anyone else near our driveway other than me today? No, why? My dad gave me a worried look. No reason. I was just curious. I lowered my head and continued eating my chicken stew. 3 loud knocks came from our front door. I wonder who that could be. My dad said as he stood up and walked towards the door. Sorry to bother you this late in the evening, but have you seen Jack? It was Jack and Lucy's father. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I sat there trying to listen in on their conversation. Not since this morning. Why, has something happened? I heard my dad's reply. You could hear the worry in his voice. He was out with Scott, Mike, and Lucy earlier, but he never came home. Lucy said that she thought he had come home early, as he disappeared when she was showing Mike and Scott her snowman. Jack's father responded without taking a breath. I'll grab a torch and help you find him. He probably just wandered off and got lost trying to get home. My dad ran back into the kitchen. I could hear the kitchen drawers being pulled open in a hurry. Dad, let me help, I said as I stood up from the chair. Sure, the more people we have looking, the quicker we can find him. My dad tossed me a torch, and I grabbed my coat, shoes, and ran out of the house. You could hear the echoes of the neighbors shouting down the road. Jack, where are you? My dad and I started by searching under the snowed-in cars in case he hid underneath one to get away from the storm. By now the storm was picking up. The snowflakes were the size of baseballs, and it was getting harder to see where we were going. Jack? Come on, Jack. Tell us where you are. I could hear my dad shouting, but at this point, I could no longer see him. I only had the dim light from my torch to help me avoid the various patches of ice. Ice was starting to form on my eyelashes, causing the world to become disorienting. Trying to walk in a straight line was taking all my concentration, and even then, I kept tripping and sliding around. I could no longer hear the sound of the neighbors shouting over the storm. The light from my torch was no longer helpful. It felt like I was wandering around for hours. It was an endless expanse of snow in all directions, with no end in sight. "Scott, help me. It's cold and all I can see is white." I looked to my left. "Jack? Jack, is that you?" I could hear Jack shouting, "Scott, please help me." I followed Jack's voice through the snow. All I could hear over and over again was the sound of Jack calling me for help. I kept walking towards Jack, but the snow had gotten so deep that I was now swimming through it. The snow was filling my mouth as I tried to call out for him, but my throat was frozen shut. Pushing the snow was causing my whole body to shake, and I don't know if it was because of the burning cold or because I was exhausted. Jack's voice sounded like he was standing right next to me, shouting in my ear. I couldn't go any farther. I collapsed into the snow, and as my eyes started to freeze shut, I saw my snowman. I don't know why it took me so long to figure it out. The snowman was a perfect replica of Jack. I forced myself up and ran towards Jack. As I got closer, I tried to slow myself down, but I couldn't. I went tumbling into the snowman. It wasn't snow. I hit something solid. I tried to unfreeze my eyes long enough to see clearly. I wish I could have just closed my eyes and let the cold take me from this nightmare. As my vision cleared, I saw a pair of bloodshot eyes staring back at me. It was Jack's head. It had come off his body as I fell into him. I pushed myself back, but my back hit something hard. I looked up and my dad was looking down at me, but he wasn't moving. His eyes wouldn't leave my gaze and he wasn't blinking. I screamed. Struggling to my feet, I went to run. But I could see now. Mike, Lucy, my mom. Every one of our neighbors was standing out in the storm. They weren't moving, and in the snowstorm that covered our street, I could see dozens of bloodshot eyes staring at me, and I knew they were asking for help. I couldn't take it. I ran. I ran so far and for so long that when someone found me, I was covered head to toe in snow. When I led the police back to my street, they discovered that everyone in my street had been strangled and covered in snow. For months after that night, I was known as the only survivor of the snowman killer. There are lots of things from that night that keeps me awake, but the one thing that the police, therapists, and that I can't explain is how Jack's voice led me to him through the storm, when he was long dead in my driveway. This started when I was around 20. It was my first time leaving the house and having my own place. I came up with a challenge when I was just lying around and trying makeup on. The challenge is to make a strange face every time you see your own reflection. It has to be the same face every time you saw yourself in the mirror, or a random reflective piece of metal, as long as you can see yourself. You had to make the same face. The goal of the challenge was to trick your brain to think that's how you look all the time. It made sense to me, since you only get to see yourself in reflective items. I'm not the expressive type, so this was pretty interesting. I told my friends about it. I didn't want them to think I lost my mind all of a sudden whenever I looked at something. The first day I started doing it, I thought it was funny. I smiled widely, showing my teeth. I made the face when I turned my phone off. I almost broke the expression. I held my laughter. I made the expression while looking at the window. While brushing my teeth, I tried replicating the expression, since I can't really smile widely while brushing my teeth. Whenever I passed through the mirror, I still made the face even though I'll see it for a split second. I did it everywhere. I did get a couple stares, but I didn't mind. I think it worked. When I imagine myself, I see myself having a bored and tired looking face. But now, I see myself smiling, almost like those clowns or stock images of children. But it wasn't enough. My brain is still aware that it's just a challenge, so I kept going for 2 months. I did it for so long, it became a habit. I did start to creep myself out when I stared at my own face in the dark. The power was off one night after a thunderstorm, and I needed to wash my hands. I stared at my own eyes in the dark while I was washing my hands. You know how you stare at yourself for so long, you look like a different person? That's what happened, but I brushed it off as nothing. It still raised a few hairs behind my neck. It was only your brain making it scary, I thought. I still kept doing it. When the laptop screen turns black, I smiled. Before, it felt funny, but now the expression feels sinister. My face looked like a realistic mask that you would buy in Halloween. That didn't stop me from doing it. A few weeks come and go. My friends and I plan to go to the amusement park. Mind you, they still know I'm doing the challenge I made. They tricked me into going into the House of Mirrors. I was laughing since my face looked extra weird since the mirrors were made to make a person look bigger, smaller, wide. One of the mirrors made me stare at myself longer though. I was doing the expression, right? Well, nothing changed. My face wasn't big or small. Maybe they just placed a regular mirror, was my first thought. I called a friend over, let's call her Margot, and told her to look at the same mirror. Her reflection stretched. She laughed at herself. Whoa, this mirror is crazy. That mildly sent chills on my back, but I brushed it quickly. Margot called all of us and asked the stranger to take a picture of us. She quickly posted the picture and immediately turned off the phone. We went out and explored the amusement park more. When it was time to go, we bid our goodbyes. While I was going home, Margot sent me a text, saying that I have to check out her post on Instagram. If you're wondering, I'm still doing the challenge. I didn't look at the post yet since I didn't think much of it. As soon as I arrived, I opened the app. I looked at the post before looking closely at the picture itself. I only noticed it when a comment on the post said, "What the hell is wrong with the mirrors?" To my horror, all the mirrors had my expression, even the ones where my back is turned. My actual expression in the picture is just me normally smiling. No exaggerated expressions, like the one I've been doing every time I saw my own reflection. It didn't even look at me the longer I stared at each mirror. Red eyes, it made the reflection look psychotic. The longer I stared at the photo, the more I realized how messed up each face was in every mirror. But that one mirror, which I'm guessing was the strange mirror I encountered, was all messed up. The eyes were fully black. The corner of each mouth stretched to the point you could see all of their teeth. All I could say is that it didn't look like a face anymore. I quickly turned off the phone. I didn't bother changing my clothes that night since I didn't want to see myself doing the expression. I went to bed. I didn't have any dreams that I would remember, and no nightmares either. But I know I felt like someone was staring at my back before falling asleep. I stopped doing the challenge altogether, but I still catch myself sometimes making the same face from muscle memory. I tried forgetting the whole challenge. I didn't want to be reminded of the horrific photo. I might forget about it, but the photo is still in my mind. I removed all of my mirrors the next day. I didn't want to take any photos anymore using the front camera. I would try not to look at myself. Margot deleted the photo afterwards. She deleted the post as well. She told me that it gave her nightmares. I asked her what she saw. I wanted to make sure I saw the same thing. She told me all the details. She didn't think it was me. It's been years. We never figured out what happened to the photo, or how it happened. I still fear mirrors to this day. The television made light crackling sounds as I turned it off, abruptly leaving me in darkness. I should have turned on a light first. I thought as I stood up. I looked to my right, seeking out the faint glow of my cell phone charging on the bookcase. Not seeing it, I cautiously made my way across the room. Not cautious enough. God damn it. I held my breath, waiting for the throbbing in my toe to stop. Reaching forward, I felt the back of a dining room chair. Apparently I'd passed the bookcase by several feet. It took a moment to decide the best course of action. I could turn around to attempt finding my phone in the dark again, or I could get to the table and reach for the chain to the ceiling fan's light. I pushed my hand beyond the chair, feeling for the table, and nearly lost my balance as my hand was met by the empty space, where I was sure the table should be. Gripping the back of the chair with one hand, I made my way around it, while patting at the darkness in front of me with the other. No table. I squeezed my eyes closed, hoping to expedite the slow process of my eyes becoming accustomed to the dark. Upon opening them, I looked around me. No glow from the phone's charging dock on the bookcase, no streetlight escaping behind the curtains, and no hint of the digital clocks on the stove and microwave. My surroundings were shrouded in black. I wasn't even sure which direction I was facing now. Inching my way back to the chair, I sat down and listened for the familiar noises of my house. It was oddly and obtrusively quiet. The silence pounded against my ears. I knew no matter which direction I went, I'd soon hit a wall, and then a light switch, so I stood up. With ginger steps, I left the chair. My lone island in the dark. This is too far, I thought, as the seeds of panic planted themselves. I should have hit a wall by now. I pawed at the darkness around me, feeling nothing but air. My shoe scuffed against the floor, making a noise that shouldn't have come from my carpeted floor. Somewhere behind me, from what sounded like a greater distance than my home was capable of, I heard an echoed scraping. Hello? I regretted speaking, but as soon as the word left my mouth, it echoed as if I were in a cave. I lived alone. I had no pets, and my neighbors' homes were quite far away. If there was something in my house, I did not want to call it over, especially in the dark. Everything was wrong. My house was not this big. The panic seeds began to germinate. My breathing quickened, and my heart pounded in my chest. The scraping stopped, and was replaced by the sound of slow footsteps. My panic bloomed as the footsteps grew into the thumps of running feet, getting louder, coming closer, and gaining speed. I struggled to breathe, and my heartbeat drummed in my ears as I hurriedly backed away from the oncoming source of my fear. My left foot hit something and I toppled backwards, landing on cold, wet stone. This was not my house. The oncoming footfall stopped, leaving only the noises of my own ragged breathing, my heart pounding, and the ear-drilling silence. I reached around to find the thing I had tripped over. Rounded top, hard, several holes, and teeth. A skull. This was absolutely not my house. I shuddered and put the skull back down. Carefully pushing myself back to my feet, keeping my ears alert, I turned and took a step. Behind me something shifted. I took another, and it was mimicked by the thing behind me. I took a step. It took a step. I took another step, and so did it. My outstretched hands hit hard stone. I strafed to the side only to hear the motion repeated by the thing in the dark. Patting my way along the stone wall, I tried to ignore the thing following me. My fingers hit smooth plastic. A light switch. The noises behind me became louder and frantic as it rushed to me. I could feel hot breath on my neck as large hands gripped my shoulders. I flipped the switch. My eyes instantly closed as the bright white light assaulted the darkness. I eased them open to find myself looking at my kitchen wall. I turned around, not sure what I'd see, but I was alone. I've since turned on every light in my house. I don't know where I went when the lights went out, but I don't plan on letting it happen again. Here's some background information for y'all before I tell my experience. I'm a 21-year-old male from Texas, and I've always had a fascination with everything scary. The house my girlfriend Taylor and I shared sat in the only clearing in the otherwise dense woods that covered the 10-acre property. We also have 2 pit bulls, Duke and Rosie. Now I'll begin my story. "Hey, did you hear that?" Taylor whispered. "Hear what?" I mumbled, sleep still fogging my brain. "The dogs. They're growling at the door." "I'll go check on them." I climbed out of bed and grabbed my shotgun off the rack. I slowly walked to the front door and looked out the peephole. No one was there. I decided to take a look from outside. "Rosie, Duke, come with me," I commanded. Both of them shot in tow. I stepped out into the night. I looked around with my flashlight near the tree line surrounding the house, but found nothing more than a rather large axis buck. Thinking that must be why the dogs were acting up, I decided to head back inside and check in with Taylor. "Did you find anything?" Taylor asked immediately as I walked in the door. "I was worried," she added, waiting for my response. "The only thing I saw out there was an axis. I'm guessing that's why the dogs were growling." "Must be," she replied. "How about a movie? I don't feel like I can fall back asleep right now." "Sure. Something scary?" I suggested, and her eyes lit up with excitement. "Yeah," she shrieked, then ran to the bedroom, beckoning me to follow. When the end credits to our movie rolled, I checked the time on my phone. It was nearly 3 a.m. As per our usual routine, Taylor and I went outside onto the porch to have a cigarette before bed. As we were out there, I noticed the dogs were standing perfectly still, staring off in the woods with an intensity I had never seen from them before. "Hey," Taylor nudged me. "What's up with Duke and Rosie? I've never seen them act like this before." I started to get a terrible, gut-wrenching feeling deep inside me. I just knew something wasn't right. "I think we should go check it out." I managed to keep the fear out of my voice. I know, not my brightest moment, but everyone makes stupid decisions now and then. "Okay," Taylor replied, but we need to bring the dogs and I'll go get my handgun. We hurried inside to get the supplies we needed and set out into the woods. The dogs seemed to know where they were headed, so Taylor and I followed them, guns and flashlights at the ready. We walked for what seemed like hours, but I'm sure it only felt stretched because of the growing fear inside me that told me to turn tail and run in the other direction. Just as I thought I could go no farther, I started to hear an eerie chanting, like several voices speaking in unison. My blood turned to ice, and I saw that Taylor's face was pale as a piece of paper. There was no doubt that I wasn't imagining the voices. They were real, and I could see faint light flickering through the trees just ahead. "Call the cops now," I whispered to Taylor. "I can't," she sobbed. "There's no reception out here. It won't go through." Just great, I thought. Stuck in the woods with someone or something with no way to call for help. Instead of falling into despair, I decided to take action. "Just stay here," I whispered. "No, I want to stay with you," Taylor said defiantly. She looked determined, and I knew there was no way to change her mind. "Fine," I muttered quietly. "We need to get closer and figure out what's going on. We can't just turn around without knowing what they're doing on their property." I turned to the dogs. "Silence," I commanded sternly. Knowing that now, they were less likely to make any noise that might alert whoever, I decided to make our woods their new home. We slowly crept closer, careful to make as little noise as possible. We reached a clearing where 5 cloaked men were standing around a small fire, hands joined and chanting in a language that eluded my understanding. I didn't know why, but my fear turned into something far worse, something that chilled me to the bone even in the Texas heat. I then had a sudden realization of what had amplified my fear to that extent. One of the men had locked eyes with me. His gaze was cold and calculating, unblinking. There was no doubt in my mind that he saw me, even through the darkness that surrounded the light of their fire. I froze, and I don't mean to sound cliche, but the only thing I can think of is a deer in headlights, trying to figure out how to get out of this terrifying ordeal alive. I looked back at Taylor, thinking to myself, are these going to be our last moments in this world? Are we going to die here tonight? Those thoughts suddenly stirred something I didn't expect. Hatred towards those men, and I now wanted nothing more than to kill them, to make them suffer for causing Taylor to fear for her life. All of this rushed through my head in an instant. The man that had seen me hadn't even alerted his friends yet. With a sound that can only be described as inhuman, I rushed towards the men, and everything went black. I regained consciousness and took in my surroundings. We were still in the woods, my head resting in Taylor's lap. What happened? I managed to croak out. My throat felt dry and sore. My body also ached all over. You attacked the men and nearly killed them, she replied. We need to get back to the house and call the police. Alright, I said, rising to my feet. Are you okay? Yes, she said gently. Now let's go. As we finally reached the clearing that the house was situated in, the sun was beginning to rise. The promise of another scorching summer day filled me with overwhelming relief after the surreal events of the night before. When the police and ambulance arrived, we showed them where we had left the men, and they were taken away for medical treatment. As they had loaded up one of the guys, I heard one of the EMTs say something about how it looked like an animal attacked the men. At the time, I had thought, good, those men were monsters and deserved what they got. But now, I can't help but wonder if maybe I'm the monster that lurks in those woods.